I was a bit like, where's all the women?
And I went, I'm Michelle, I'm the lunch lady.
I'll be honest, I didn't even know what a quantity surveyor was when I joined. I think where you really see an impact is when you've got male allies on your side.
You know, I've been able to progress, I've been trusted with responsibility.
If you're willing to put yourself forward, I think you reap the benefits. And the challenges, yes, they're there, but they're far outweighed by the positives. How much you do get supported, how much you can learn, how much you can develop.
Welcome to Create and Construct, the podcast. I'm Michelle, and today, in recognition of last week's Women in Construction Week, we are talking about how the industry is evolving, what leadership looks like today, and what opportunity really means in commercially influential roles. When I first stepped into construction almost 20 years ago, it felt very different. There were fewer women in senior positions, fewer visible role models, and far less open conversation about progression. Today, I'm joined by Martha Penney, Chartered Senior Quantity Surveyor at Taylor Wimpey. Martha is involved in every stage of a development's life cycle, from land acquisition right through to completed homes. She has been working in house building for just over 6 years. Before that, she briefly worked as a police officer after graduating from university. One of her proudest milestones was completing her surveying degree while working full-time. That's no small achievement, and graduating despite the challenges of balancing both. Outside of work, she competes in show jumping across the UK, is a long-standing Everton season ticket holder, and, as if that wasn't enough, has run an ultramarathon from Glasgow to Edinburgh. Martha, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Delighted to have you here. So, police to quantity surveying, how did that happen?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a crazy one, really. When I left university, so my first degree, I did criminology and psychology. And during my time at university, obviously, I was looking forward to my careers and what I was going to do. And I got onto 2 graduate schemes. One was with the police and one was with Barratt Homes. Now, the one at Barratt, unfortunately, was just geographically not suitable at the time. So I joined the police and, I did a relevant degree. So I was looking at, I was happy to go there. And then Barratt phoned me probably about 8 months after I'd joined the police and said they'd got a role up near where I was and would I consider moving. And I was like, absolutely. It was, the police was a great experience, but I'd kind of say my heart wasn't in it. And Barratt had kind of, I'd enjoyed what I'd seen from looking into the construction industry when I'd interviewed for them. So I was like, yeah, you know what, I'm gonna go. So that's how it started. So it was a bit, I kind of had no idea what I was walking into. Okay,
brilliant. So you haven't looked back since?
No.
What drew you to quantity surveying then?
I'll be honest, I didn't even know what a quantity surveyor was when I joined. I think when I went through the interview process and things, I started to look, I've got no family or anything in construction, so I didn't really know anything about construction. I think that's why I was quite taken aback from when I started, especially to where I am now. I don't think you have any idea about the roles that are in there. I think you just think it's people building houses and then that's it. And actually, I had no idea that these kind of jobs existed and you could do, you could have so many transferable skills and take it into that industry. And I think that was what was really nice, was that Barratt didn't stipulate you needed all this experience or a construction degree, etc. And I went in and actually I took quite a lot of skills there with me. And although it's very different, I think it was beneficial me doing what I'd done before. It was a good life experience. So
I think you hit the nail on the head there, that there's so much opportunity in the construction industry, and I don't think a lot of people realise just how much there is.
No, and I just think the breadth of jobs that there are for people to do, I just don't think anyone has any idea. I just think I think the stereotype of construction is out in the cold, building houses, or not even houses, just anything to do with construction, out in the cold, out on site. You're grafting early in the morning, late at night, and I don't think people realise how much opportunity there is out there in an industry that is, really is going to continue forever, because we've got to continue building.
We have to keep building.
Yeah.
So what was the biggest surprise for you then when you joined the construction industry?
I'll be honest, on my first walk around the office, I got introduced to everybody, and I was a bit like, where's all the women? I had no idea. I hadn't considered it. I hadn't considered that wouldn't be, that it wouldn't just be like a normal office because it was an office that I had no idea. And actually, I think for me, it was the crossover of, yes, there's a stereotype of construction, there's a lot of other jobs, but actually that is still the reality. And actually the people that working in it is not as diverse as it should be, really.
So you still find that it's male dominated in commercial meetings on site, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely improved, and I'd say sometimes you think, oh, this is fine, and there's quite a good mix, and then other times you walk into a room and it's kind of a bit of like a smack in the face. You're like, oh wow, yeah, like we've got some improvements to make, and actually you are very much on your own, and I think it's not a bad thing. I just think sometimes you can be blindsided by how kind of on your own you can feel sometimes, just by being the only woman in the room, and it can be difficult, especially in an environment that's quite loud. And I think sometimes you have to put on a persona to be more like a man, and actually that's probably not the right thing. And then I think you can sometimes feel like you're not yourself, and I think that's a shame, really, because you kind of change how you are as a person to feel part of what you feel you should feel. But actually I think being diverse and different ways of thinking is really important, and actually when you do get the opportunity to voice your opinion and it gets heard, I think that's where the best things come from.
I completely agree. So do you think that hinders the development of women, or do you think that competence overrides gender?
I think it's very mixed, and I think it really depends on the environment that you're in. I think it's amazing to have that support network, and I think being in an environment, particularly my experiences, you've very much been back to, there's been a lot of groups and a lot of support networks which are around women in construction. I think where you really see an impact is when you've got male allies on your side, and you'll be in meetings and they really, make an effort to make you feel supported. And I think it's at that point where it just becomes normal and you're just doing your job. And I think it's then when your competence can show through and you do get listened to, because somebody else has helped you to overcome that barrier. And I think for me, you can go in and kind of think, I need to fight this on my own, but actually you don't. I think it needs to come from everyone else, and a big support network. And I think definitely having, going to these award ceremonies and things like that, being celebrated for what you've done, and just, overcoming those barriers, which I'll be honest, a lot are very subtle. And I think it's, people think, oh, well, people stop wolf whistling out of vans and things like that. And actually it's like, yeah, maybe that stopped, but that's actually also easy to call out. I think what's difficult is more like the subtle barriers that you face that are difficult to explain, and they can make you question whether it's you. And I think that's where, when you've got those male allies that are looking out for you, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, I agree. Having that mentorship and the support from everybody around you really helps in the construction industry.
Yeah.
So looking back over the last 6 years, do you think it has changed at all or improved at all since you started?
I think it has definitely improved. Yeah, I think where now there's definitely room for improvement would be to kind of try and reduce the stereotype from a younger age. I don't think there's enough work done with young people in schools. And like I said, I had no idea that surveying was even a job. I had no idea that these kind of things happened in the building industry. And I think it needs more role models going out to schools, people that you actually think, oh, I could be like that, going out and saying, there's actually opportunities out there, and you don't need to be, a trade driving a van, which is what a lot of people think, especially young girls. I've done a lot of work with like school outreaches, and you speak to people and they go, oh, I can't do that, or oh no, I wouldn't suit that. And actually I think you'd be very surprised at how young females would do coming straight out of school or even straight out of university. I just don't think they think it's accessible for them. I think that's a shame.
Yeah, I suppose, things have changed a lot probably since I was in school, but for careers advice, do you want to go down the doctor route? Do you want to go down the lawyer route? Do you want to go down the business route? But it was never talked about construction, and there's just, so you can do all of that within construction. So well, maybe not the doctor, but you can do a lot within construction.
There's a lot, and I think that females are kind of looked at as, oh, well, are you going to go into sales? And I think it's very easy to make these passive comments, but actually there's a lot of work that can be done in schools and these careers days. And I think also now, which is very good, I think people are leaving school with a lot more knowledge and a lot more information about what they want to do. I don't think it's you go to university and then you decide. I think now, children and young people are a lot more informed, and I think that we're missing a big trick with, especially the fact we've got such a big skills and labour shortage, we're missing a trick with getting that demographic of people coming straight out of school.
Absolutely. And maybe the construction companies need to be doing more as well for careers days, actually partnering with schools to teach people what it's like to be working in construction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there is work being done that's helping that. But I think alongside that, there needs to be a continuing people shouting about how the fact construction's not how people say it is. Because if you ask 10 young people, you're going to get nine of them that say, oh, well, you're out on site, you're cold, it's bricklaying, I don't want to do that. And actually, I think it's that stereotype that needs to be broken down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. You mentioned something earlier about the mentors, how it's really good to have that support network within construction. And that is something that I think has changed a lot. I've been in construction now for almost 20 years. And I remember a particular story when I was probably about 23, 24. And I was chairing this monthly meeting with lots of different brands from the company I worked for. And it was in fact, it was all men, and I was the only woman, and I was the youngest by far there as well. And I felt like I was perceived like a little girl.
Yeah.
And I remember they brought one month they brought this older gentleman in who had actually retired, and they'd brought him back because he had experience dealing with a similar project before. And he came in and he started asking me to take the tea, coffee, and lunch orders before these meetings. So this happened for a few months in a row, and eventually there was 1 month I came back in, and he had started the meeting without me. So they were doing the introductions around the table, and I sat down beside him at the head of the table. And when it got round to me, he said, introduce yourself. And I went, I'm Michelle. I'm the lunch lady. And when something just comes out of your mouth, and I couldn't believe I'd said it, but there was silence in the room. And then afterwards I went into my director at the time. I was like, I've done something awful. I told him what I did, and he laughed and he said, you stuck up for yourself, that's great.
Yeah. I
think the difference now is that wouldn't be tolerated now.
No, and I think now you'd probably get one of the other men probably making a drink and offering you one, which I do think has helped, but definitely there is still that. It's just, I think there's still definitely an image of where you belong, I'd say, in construction, and it's probably not as a leader. I think there's a lot being done, I work with Taylor Wimpey, CEO, is a female. I think that's massive. I think you go into a company and you've got someone to look up to, and you can think, that's possible. And I think that's making big strides as well, to be able to have someone to look up to and know that if you go into that room like that with full of men, you're not on your own really, even if they're not there with you, you know that they are.
Yeah. So
in the background.
I'd probably say then that culture isn't defined by when issues arise, it's defined by how they're handled.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's harsh to say all men are like that, because it's not. I think it's definitely a culture thing, and it's easy in a larger group or a big meeting setting to kind of just go along with it and not call it out, because you don't want to be like looked at and say, well, you can't say anything in front of them. And I think that is definitely a culture piece, but 100% is getting better. There's obviously still work to do.
Always improvements to be made. So like you said, construction can sound unwelcoming, a little intimidating, especially for people that don't know anything about construction. But personally, aside from a few early things that happened early in my career, my experience in the construction industry has been largely positive. I've been able to progress, I've been trusted with responsibility, and it has been mainly men who have invested in me as well. I suppose there is the odd bad egg, and I recently listened to Gabby Logan at an awards ceremony. She was hosting an awards ceremony, and she told a story about comments that she had received kind of early in her career, and that's in sports commentary, and that seems like a much more glamorous industry than construction. But it made me realize that this happens.
It's everywhere.
It happens everywhere. But I feel that in construction, as long as you are willing to ask questions and you're eager to progress, and you get stuck in, that your roll up the sleeves get stuck in, that the industry rewards effort.
Absolutely. I think that the progression and how far you can go in your career in construction is massive. I'd say the challenges, yes, they're there, but they're far outweighed by the positives. How much you do get supported, how much you can learn, how much you can develop. I can not say that, I've faced anybody who said, oh no, oh, you're not doing that, or you're taking opportunities away from you. That's not how it is. And I would also say that it's very much a team effort, and I think that does pull through. And if you pull your weight, then everyone, tends to be very willing to, invest in you and, like you say, give you opportunities. And I think that's massive. And actually, yes, it's quite scary out there, but if you're willing to put yourself forward, I think you reap the benefits. And I'd say, for me, that's how I've kind of progressed early on, is just saying kind of like, yeah, I'll give that a go, and trying to kind of immerse yourself. And if you do pull your weight and you're a team player, I think everyone does reward you with that. And personally, you're rewarded as well. I think construction is so, everyone is supportive, and actually it is a team effort. Houses don't get built by one person, and everyone pulls together. And I think for me, I've definitely found as well that if I was in an environment where I thought, do I really know everything I need to here? If the answer was no, if you ask, people are very willing to help. And actually, I think that's the scariest point, to say, actually, I don't know. But even as a woman, I think people are, they're willing to help, and they don't go, she doesn't know anything. I'd say it's better to do that than to kind of say, oh, well, I do know, and be quite bullish and kind of forceful with maybe what you don't know. I'd say, if you ask for a little bit of help, people are so willing to help. And I think that's not what people imagine when they think of, the construction industry as a career.
I always say, I tend to say there's no such thing as a stupid mistake, a stupid question. But for me, it's much better to ask what could be perceived as a stupid question than making a preventable mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is, if you're not in it, you don't realise, but every single day, everyone from the top down are learning. We build the same houses all over the country every single day, and yet we still do things differently every day. We're still learning. I think, you just say, how have you faced that, and what can I learn from that? I think that's massive.
I think it's a sad day when somebody thinks they know everything.
Yeah.
What is good, I suppose, at the minute as well, is that the progress that we see within this industry is tangible now. So, for example, using Tobermoor, we have 62 people managers in Tobermoor, and 38% of those people managers are women, which would have been far less common 2 decades ago. Now we are still seeing gaps. For example, there'd be less in production. Is that mirrored in house building? Like, do you see the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's still, more out on site is definitely more male dominated. You've got your sales teams, which I'd say are more female dominated, which is how it's kind of stereotyped, but there's definitely becoming a better mix. And I think when you see teams that are a lot more diverse, I think you can see the difference. And I definitely think that they're more successful when you've got a bit more diversity in there, and you've got different ways of thinking, and, different opinions brought to the table. And I do think that it's definitely getting better out there. Obviously, there's work to do. But yeah, that is definitely mirrored the same as, the production side is, I'd say it's more male dominated, but actually, women in those roles are supported as well. And I think it's really important that we get out there. I think the only thing I'd say about the production side of it, and potentially the same for here at Tobermoor, is obviously the practicality. There's still work to do with the welfare out on site, PPE. There's wider conversations about how they manage while they're pregnant, etc. And I think that's a bigger barrier to kind of face, but actually behind the scenes, the support for the women is definitely there, and hopefully those are smaller kind of challenges that we can get over.
Yeah, I want to see more petite PPE.
Absolutely.
I am sick of looking like a child in PPE.
Yeah.
So for listeners who might not understand your role, we spoke about house building there. Can you explain what your day-to-day role is?
Yeah, so I think for me, as a surveyor working in commercial, we take sites right from the start all the way to the end. So we do the majority of procuring of the subcontractors, getting hold of the suppliers, and making sure that we've got the labour on site. We also manage the budgets, and obviously included in that. So we obviously have a margin that we need to maintain, and we manage the life cycle of the job. And obviously that, when there's people and materials involved, that's obviously comes with its challenges. But yeah, it's interesting. We do everything from paying your invoices to make sure all the suppliers and subcontractors are paid, all the way through to measuring out on site, getting out on site, making sure everything's going well. I'd say that commercial sit right in the middle of, a big team effort. But yeah, we have quite a lot of responsibilities, and I think you'd be surprised what we get up to every day.
And then what does commercial leadership mean in your position?
Oh, so there's a lot of different avenues to that. Obviously, we have assistants and trainees which are coming up through the business. So it's really important that we obviously invest our time. I was a trainee, there's different roles that they a good trainee makes your job so much easier, and we've got a good team now, and I think they have a big role to play in helping, keep all them cogs turning. There's also other elements of leadership. I think it's easy from a commercial point of view sometimes to say, well, we've got a budget to maintain, we need to keep the costs down, etc. But we have to make the right decision, and sometimes that's not always commercially beneficial. And I think it's leading the team, not just the commercial team, but the whole site team. We've got production, we've got sales, we've got customers to look after, and we've got everybody, and that decision impacts everybody. We can make a decision, it might be the cheapest, but is it the easiest to build? Is it the best outcome for the customer? Can we physically do it from a technical point of view? And I think that's a leadership element that you don't really realise that you're doing each day, and that's, we're gathering all that information and making decisions based on that.
Because sometimes cheapest isn't best.
Not always.
No. So then when you're reviewing a scheme, what are the cost risks that can wipe out margin? So
for us, obviously the cost is risk tends to be in the ground. We can't always find out what's going on in the ground. At Taylor Wimpey, we are very good at having a lot of meetings up front, getting a lot of information, because there's nothing worse than changing things late in the day. And I think that's important to be able to make sure that we've got all of our designs and we're ready to go. And when we get on site, we know what we're building, we know who's building it, and we know where we're getting all the materials from, to try and eliminate as much risk. Obviously, you can't eliminate it all, and that's obviously part of my job to manage that. And I think it's, identifying the risk, but also identifying the opportunities, and it's a time input piece as well with, when's that risk going to come and when's that opportunity going to come, because they don't always come hand in hand.
So then again, would you say that it's really important to get all stakeholders involved early?
Absolutely, because if we don't, then we end up on the back foot. You're pushing people to start on site and you're not quite ready. I think we definitely try and push to get everyone on site in time, get the subcontractors signed up early, and get all the suppliers there, because as well, it's a ticking time, really. As soon as we get on site, we need to get on site and start building. We've got a job to do. We've got to deliver houses, and there's customers at the other end waiting for those houses. So we can't be getting on site and then going, oh, actually we haven't got a supplier, we're not ready. We've got to do a lot of the work up front. So although you might, a lot of our job when we're not building, I think, oh, it's a downtime. Actually, there's a lot of work that goes on up front and making sure that all that's in place.
That seems to be a recurring theme in all of these episodes that we've had so far. So there tends to be, or there could be, a little bit of tension sometimes between the design ambition and the commercial discipline. What design decisions most commonly add cost without maybe adding that proportional value?
I think, as we're saying, late design changes is obviously an impact. Anything that you do late is a difficulty, because I think you can look at a design and think, oh, we'll just change that quickly, but everything has a knock-on effect. It's one big project. You change one element of the design and that has a huge knock-on effect to everything. And that sometimes, you think, oh, we've foreseen all these problems, but you just sometimes can't. And I think any late changes can cause delays to getting, drawings updated, work's done on site, and ultimately it's what we need to know what we're building early on. So I think any late design changes does it hits you in the pocket.
So there's possibly a misconception about quantity surveying that it's all about cost cutting, but really it's about protecting the value of the project.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of our job is value engineering, because we're not there just to make sure that we don't spend any money. We spend money, but we have to spend it in the right places. And I think it's important that people know that. And if there's money to be spent, we'll spend it, but we've got to make sure it's right. And, it's giving us the value at the end. We're not going to sit there and waste money, but also I think you're right. I think quantity surveyors sometimes get a bad name saying, oh, you won't spend anything. But it's, we've got a job to do and we've got to protect it. And sometimes we can foresee that, we need that money elsewhere and it's better spent elsewhere. So I think we spend all of our days deciding where it's best spent.
Yes. So have buyer expectations, have you noticed over the last 6 years, have buyer expectations changed at all? Are buyers wanting different features within their homes now that maybe they didn't before, for example, EV charging?
Yeah, so I think particularly with the new build market, I think, we've got various different customers. we need that curb appeal. We need it to be different. I do think, new house builders and volume house builders particularly have got a bad name. You build boxes, you just cram as many as you can on the site. That's not the case. We're building to design guides. We're trying our, we do everything we can to make sure that they're individual. And I think there's definitely got to be a curb appeal because, it's people's biggest investments. It's a flat market out there. It's difficult at the best of times. I think it's got to look how people want it to look from a design point of view, but then also internally, I think since COVID, there's been a big shift in how people want the houses to work. And I think we do a lot of work, particularly internally, to make sure that those spaces work. You're not going to buy a new build and then start, a full renovation on it, changing how it looks inside. So I think from a design point of view, we work on that and how that looks to the customer. So is that how, elevation changes? Is it surfacing changes outside? Is it how the garden looks? Is it how, the layout of the house inside? Living space upstairs, downstairs, etc. And then also the choices that they get, if you were to renovate a house or to buy one and go in, you'd go and choose all your own things. So I think it's important that customers do get those options. And I think those are really readily available now. And I think very much you can go in and put your own stamp on a new build.
That's interesting. So over COVID, was it more the customers wanted more open plan, or was it?
Yeah, so I think obviously during COVID, people wanted a lot more space outside. So, previous outdoor rooms, and then also working from home spaces, overnight people went to work from home, which was a big shift for everybody.
Yeah, and so the open plan layouts actually weren't working as well.
Downstairs, but then you also needed some office space and a little bit, and then also that depended on, do you have older children, younger children, how did that work? And then particularly the outside space, I think it made people realise that, you spend a lot of time at home and it needs to work for you.
Absolutely. Gosh, that's interesting. So for commercial professionals listening then, what makes a supplier strong?
So I think for us, obviously, we're a volume house builder. We've got to be able to keep up with the demand that we need at kind of the pace that we need. But then it's not only that. Obviously, it needs to be commercially viable, which, is up there with one of the most important things. But also from, Taylor Wimpey's point of view, it's got to be sustainable. Does it align to our values? There's a whole big range of things that we'd look at for a good supplier. It doesn't just, we can't just go and buy something off the shelf because it's the cheapest. It's got to work for all elements of the business.
And that's where your design guides come in?
Yes, yeah. Hand in hand with obviously the planning policies that we've got in place. And, the technical teams have got a lot of juggling to do before we even got on site to make sure that we're, we're aligning with all of that.
And where would you see inefficiencies in supply chain then?
I think sometimes we obviously have peaks and troughs in building and, it's keeping up with that demand when we need it, but also being able to rein it back, if we needed to slow down build. I think the big one is obviously communication from both sides. I think we need to communicate to these suppliers what we're forecasting, what we're wanting to build, but then also they need to be kind of communicating back to say, this is what we've got, this is what we can provide. And if there's an issue, obviously we need to get around that really.
So that communication would reduce the risk for you then?
Yeah, absolutely. Because, we could just continue to build on site and then one day, a lorry load of materials doesn't turn up and that has a big knock-on effect. And so we need to, keep that two-way communication to make sure that we're both getting,
Okay. And what differentiates a supplier then in a challenging market?
I think in a challenging market, cost is always going to be quite comparable. It's going to be the other elements. Can they keep up with the supply chain? How are they to deal with as a supplier? What's your aftercare look like from a customer's point of view? And your wider, I'd say, social values as a company, sustainability, etc. That's big on the horizon. And, it's what, customers wouldn't want to come to one of our houses and buy something that's the materials from and, unethical or unsustainable. So I think there's a bigger, wider picture than just cost, really.
It's about that partnership. So in a volatile market, partnership really matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, it's, our group deals are kind of like central to what we do. And that's obviously, they don't just look at cost from a group deal perspective. And yeah, I think all of those elements kind of come into it.
Mm. So the thing I love most about construction, aside from the people, is the practical knowledge that it gives. So for example, I had friends the other day who asked, they were changing their skirting and they asked, and I was able to advise them on skirting. Or at the minute, I said to you earlier, I'm building a house, and when the builder's talking about foundations, drainage, pocket doors, glulam beams, I know what he's talking about. And for me, there's something about that that's incredibly empowering.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I feel that my parents' generation, they learned these practical lessons in school. They learn woodworking, sewing, all of that. And I feel that the generations after are missing out on that they don't seem to have that same exposure. And for me, kind of construction gives that back.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we understand materials, we understand why things cost, how much they cost, and we understand how things are built. So for me, it's not a career advantage, it's more of a life advantage.
Definitely a life skill. And we've just, like I was saying earlier, we've just done a renovation at home and we've had exactly the same thing. You know, you'd get builders coming in and asking questions and looking straight to my husband and saying, oh, you know, what do you think to this? And he'd be like, I don't know, you'll have to ask her, I've got no idea. And I think it's quite nice. And actually you can see quite a practical view on life, and you can go, you know, about your daily life and just appreciate, you know, how things have been built. So yeah, no, I do think that, but maybe it's a bit more that nowadays is a bit more children behind screens, but and not so much outside building.
Yeah, true. So one thing that feels different, and you touched on it before, one thing that feels different to 20 years ago when I first started out is the visibility. So you said about award ceremonies, there's more award ceremonies at the minute, and you were recently nominated in the top 5 for, was it Rising Star Award for the Women in Property Awards. How do things like that make you feel? Like, what does that mean to you?
I think I think the award ceremonies, it's great because it makes, you know, all the hard days kind of disappear, and you think, you know what, actually it is appreciated. And I think it's really nice to be celebrated. And actually you're just surrounding yourself by like-minded people and people who've been through the same experiences. And sometimes, you know, any kind of walk of life can be quite isolating. You've had a bad day, you think, am I the only one that's going through this? And then you go to things like that and it kind of all goes away. And also what's really nice about those kind of events is that it's quite horizontal praise. And sometimes, it's nice to get, you know, a well done off your boss, or, you know, you go home and say, oh, you must have had a really good day. But actually to get praise horizontally from other people in the industry at a similar level is, you know, is really nice. Like, that goes a long way.
I think it's that peer-to-peer networking as well. I find that really useful in marketing as well, because you get to speak to people, find out that they're facing similar challenges, and you come up with solutions together. I find it really useful. One thing, you know, we've seen far more mentorship programs. There's groups championing, I can't say that word, championing women in construction now. I don't know if you've heard of the I Am Housebuilding group that was Edwin De Silva set.
There's lots that are doing a lot of great work for the industry.
And then there are also it was the BMJ Awards. They had a Personality of the Year, was it last year? And one of the men within the industry spoke up on LinkedIn and said that it was a disgrace that none of the nominations were women, and he actually put forward a few women, and one of them ended up winning. So I think it's great to see people, you know, really speaking up.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I was saying earlier, I think, yes, you can go and I can spend all day shouting about how amazing it is to have women in construction, but I think it's got to come from, you know, the men in the room. You've got to feel like they want you there too. And I think it's great. I've been to a couple of awards, and actually, you know, the majority of the table and the guests have been men, and I think that's great to go and celebrate that and actually recognise it. And I think that's definitely a shift in a culture thing, because, you know, if you speak to most men at work, even if you've had a bad experience, I've sometimes said, have you got a daughter? And they've said, yeah. And I'm like, how do you think that would make her feel? And I think that definitely makes them stop and go, oh, actually, yeah, maybe I shouldn't do that, because that could be her in 5 years' time. And I think it's a bit easier to get across how it comes across to yourself if you can relate to it. And I think, you know, if someone's got a daughter, wife, you know, younger sister, niece, I think it's, you know, you go, how do you think that would make them feel, you know, if they were in that environment? And I think that's definitely an improvement that I've seen when, you know, you've got these male allies, I can't say that word either, going at these places, and kind of looking out for you and supporting you. I think that's massive.
I think with the visibility as well, visibility shapes perception, and then perception shapes opportunity. So, you know, it can only get better, hopefully. Yeah,
and just being out there, and I think seeing, you know, people in papers, you know, all these different role models in high places in construction is really important, because, you know, you've got to have someone to look up to, otherwise you just think it's not achievable.
Does it make you feel optimistic about the future?
Yes, definitely. I think it's a great industry. It's funny because during construction I had no idea, and now I just think I could never work anywhere else.
Same. Yeah. I always say once you're in construction, you won't leave it. So if we were having this conversation in 20 years' time, what would you like to have seen changed?
I'd like to see, obviously, the people that you work with and walking into environments that represent kind of the people like in the communities. I think it's really sad because like even walking onto a house building development that's nearing the end, you know, you'll see the families and the people that are living there, and they're not representative of the people that have been building it. And I think that's where it needs to come from, that we are genuinely representative of, you know, not just women, all underrepresented groups. I think that needs to be, you know, worked on. But, you know, you've got to start somewhere. And I do think it's made big strides, but I think I'd hope in 20 years' time it's absolutely booming.
Great. And then what would you say to a 17-year-old girl who is considering a career in construction?
I'd say it's going to be tough, but do it. It'll be, I think the challenge is, yes, they're there, but what you achieve and what you can get out of it definitely outweighs that.
Just the career satisfaction as well.
Yeah, it's massive, and I think it's great. And also, I think the outside of your day job, there's so much in construction. You can meet so many people, you can go and do so many things, and I think that's another thing that needs to be shouted about. You know, it's not just a day job. You don't leave at 5 o'clock. You can really do a lot with it, and I think it's a great industry to be in. I wouldn't choose anything else now.
No, it always sounds really cliche. You hear people saying it all the time, but every day is different, and that is what I love about it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, thank you so much. It is a topic that I'm hugely passionate about, and I know you are too, because we had that conversation the first time you came over here. So I'm really delighted that you joined me today to discuss it. We usually finish these episodes with a little bit of this or that. Are you happy to
Absolutely,
go for
yeah.
it? So you just say the first thing that comes into your head.
Okay.
I'll give you 2 options. Day at the office or day on site?
Day on site.
Oh, good one. Details or big picture?
Big picture.
Steady, clear round or fast against the clock?
Fast against the clock.
Fast against the clock, okay. You like the pressure then? Sprint or endurance?
Well, given I've run an ultramarathon, I'll probably have to choose endurance.
Endurance, but you'll never do it again.
Never again.
And then final one, Goodison Park or the new Everton Stadium?
Oh, Goodison Park.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. When I was 22, I was often the only woman in the room. Today, women are leading commercial teams, they're at the helm of national builders merchants, and they are shaping developments across the UK. The industry isn't perfect, we've heard that today, but it is evolving. Construction rewards curiosity, competence, and resilience, and those qualities aren't gendered. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.